yesterday, I and several members of this congregation went to see one of our church kids perform in an adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame as a musical. It was in Portsmouth. And in that cast was Elizabeth Jelinek. You folks will remember her. She has been singing, I think, before she could even say Mama and Daddy. And she's following her dream now, working professionally in the theater world. And she played a main character, well, actually played two parts, but she was a gypsy, and then she sang in this chorus that was on stage the entire play. I would recommend this for all of you to go see it, not only because Elizabeth's there, but it's a very powerful play. It says a lot of things about how we live our lives today. And it's a play that is full of music, it's full of love, full of laughter, full of sadness. And it's also a very high energy play and an enthusiastic cast. All of us that left there were truly impressed, not only with Elizabeth, but with this production. But in this production, there is a scene toward the end, and if you don't know this play or the book, it's about a young gypsy girl who is framed for murder by a government minister in 15th century Europe. And there is a child that was born earlier by her mother who passed away in a plague epidemic. And there is a hunchback who is this son, and he has spent his entire life living in the in the bell tower of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And a hunchback at that time in history was considered a freak or a monster. And he was raised there. And he only went out at night when he couldn't be seen. And he got to know this young gypsy girl, and he came to her defense at the so-called murder trial. But to get there, he had quite a conversation with himself, and that's the power of this scene, because he's on a platform under a spotlight and with members of the chorus acting as his conscience. And part of them is saying, go for it, others are saying not to. And I think he was in this spot of a sausage of angel and beast. Some people have questioned me about this title and where did I come up with it. And it actually is from a poem that was written back in 1954 when a young Chilean poet, Nacar Parra, excuse me for my poor Spanish, and he was contemplating at that time his future and his possible death. And he wrote this little poem. And by the way, he just died a couple of months ago. So he lived a full life. But it's a very interesting short poem, and it has something to say to me, and I hope it has something to say to you this morning. And it goes like this: neither too bright nor totally stupid, I was what I was, a mixture of oil and vinegar, a sausage of angel and beast. We might translate that in more modern language as between a rock and a hard place. But we are always caught in this predicament from time to time. We, live our lives on a daily basis. We go out, we go to work, we have family times, we go to places like the group that went up to Portsmouth yesterday. And there are days that are quite good, quite full of harmony. But there are days when we're going to be grumpy and disgusted. tired and bored. And we're in the midst of winter here in New England. And that is a time of, just like what we're seeing outside today, rain, could be snow. The days are getting longer, but they're still fairly short. And they're gray skies, some days snow, some days a little sunshine. So we do feel this, and we feel it so often when we have to make decisions. And this is what happened, and the reason I use these two biblical scripture readings, because, folks, I'm not going to talk about stewardship, which the widow and the mite is always, not always, but used in a lot of churches to talk about stewardship. And I'm not ready for Easter. So this doesn't have anything to do with, the Easter season. What I'm looking at are these two characters. This little, I assume she was a little widow woman. She didn't have a lot of money. She was poor. And when it came to Passover, all good Jewish people were supposed to come to the temple and put offering. And they had these elaborate, as I understand, I think they were silver pots that people would put their money in. And a lot of the people that were well off, like we are, would come and give their treasures and go about their business. But then suddenly this little woman appeared on the scene, and she gave what amounted to, in today's money, probably about 25 cents. And she gave 2 of these mites. And this was the lowest form of currency in the Roman Empire. And it was usually a little coin made out of bronze. So she came and she gave 2. And according to rabbinical law, if you only had a few mites, you only had to give 1. But she gave 2, and that's why Jesus said to the disciples, she gave of poverty. And that must have been very hard for her, because she didn't have a lot of money. We don't know what her economic situation was, other than she was poor. She might have had to give up a meal or some other thing, to buy a piece of cloth to make a new dress. But she gave what she gave. And I'm sure she was between a rock and a hard place, or an angel and a beast. And she chose the angel. Now with Jesus and Peter, it's the night before his crucifixion. And he had said earlier in the upper room, he had said something to the effect of, somebody's going to betray me and somebody's going to deny me. And it's before the rooster crowed, or the cock. And this gave great pause to Peter when the Roman official came up and said, are you a friend, or do you know about this man called Jesus? Have you been with him? However they phrased it at that time. And I don't know that he thought about it, but I have a feeling he paused, and in his mind he was saying, should I or should I not? If I say I am guilty of being with Jesus, then I'm subject to execution too. And out of weakness, which we all have from time to time, he said no, and the cock crowed. And that's when, as the reading says, brought him back to his senses, and he remembered what Jesus had said. And it doesn't say whether he went away angry or frustrated. He just had that thought. And we all have these thoughts. We live in a society today that is full of daily activities. I would think everybody, even those of us that are retired or semi-retired, live on a fast track. We're constantly on the go. We all have cell phones now. And as soon as we leave here, we'll be checking for messages. It was funny yesterday at the play. I noticed that at the intermission, people popped on their cell phones. This is what we live with today. It's good in some cases and probably not so good in others. You know, we have demands in our jobs and with our families, things that we have to do. And we come to those points in our lives where we have to make tough decisions. Looking out at this congregation this morning, I know a bunch of you had to make very tough decisions on how you were going to finance your children's education. Just as a side note, I took several courses over at Andover and Newton several years ago. Each one cost me $2,000 in tuition. I'm going to show my age here. When I went to college, a whole semester, including room and board, was $2,000. Now, we weren't making as much money then either, because it's, you know, but it does reflect on some of the pressures that we have with this. And sometimes you may have to go to your parents may have to go to their children and say, you know, I know you want to go to Dartmouth, but we just can't afford it. And you have to consider something closer to home, maybe a state school. That hurts. Hurts deeply, because you don't want to disappoint your child. And if that isn't a good example of a sausage of angel and beast, I can't think of a better one. But there are times, too, when you have to make decisions about how you want to live your life. Now, in my work as a chaplain, healthcare chaplain, I deal with this all the time, particularly over at the hospital, when I'm called in and there's a death, and nobody has ever talked to this person about death and maybe what they wanted to do as far as funeral arrangements, how they wanted to be remembered. And there you sit as the eldest son, the oldest daughter, the spouse, and people are saying, what would you like done with your husband? Do you have a funeral home? Do you have any plans? And you don't. So that's a rock and hard place. And I'll tell you one even worse. And I'm not trying to make this a gloomy sermon, but I'm trying to give us day-to-day examples of what we face. And this is where you have to put your loved one on life support. And you've never had that conversation before. One of the toughest things I ever had to do in my life is 2 years ago to make that decision on my brother, who was severely ill in Tampa, where he lives. It wasn't an easy decision because he'd never talked about it. And I feel kind of ashamed, actually. Here I've been in healthcare, and I never, had a conversation with him about this. But these are types of things that we face every day. And we face them, and we resolve them. And we resolve them through thought processes. We solve them through talks with our loved ones. And we come here to talk to God about them. That is the reason, folks, that we come Sunday mornings. On a raining, drizzly day. Now, time for confession. I know everybody in this room probably didn't want to get up and come here this morning. But you did. You didn't do it because you felt an obligation, I hope. You came because you wanted to hear the Word of God. You wanted to talk to God. You wanted to hear His presence here. in his soft words of encouragement. That's why we come. That's why we take this time. That's the reason that we serve on boards, committees, and become a leader in this church, or become a volunteer, or we go out and work in the homeless shelters. We work in immigration ministry. We work with at Christmas, making sure kids with parents that can't afford Christmas, get a gift from a stranger. That's what we're about. And sometimes we get caught in that mid-place. And it's tough. One of the best things, as I mentioned earlier, that we're doing in the next few weeks is we're going to sit down and talk and listen, and hopefully some other community members will join us, because we need to have these conversations. We're living in a society where nobody is listening to anybody some days. We ride around in cars with darkened windows. We communicate by text. We communicate by telephone. But we don't have a chance to sit down and talk some days about what it means to be who we are. And yes, we're, as my poet friend said, we're a mixture of oil and vinegar, meaning that we have hopes, aspirations, and we want to talk, but we have to find a time. And that's the purpose of what we're doing these next few weeks. I hope everyone will come and be with us so that we can have these. Because conversations can't start at the government level. They shouldn't. They need to start in places like this church, and a Starbucks, and a Panera Bread. There are several groups on Saturday morning over in North Beverly. They meet at Panera Bread for this same type of thing, to talk about what's going on in the world. I know this is kind of tough stuff, but I think it's meaningful. And let us not forget that we have the love of God with us during these times. And prayer can be a very powerful thing. Sometimes we don't always get the message back we want to get back, but it's a very powerful thing. So let us, in this time that we're here, remember who we are and what we're about, and go forth into the world and talk to each other. And yes, you might become a sausage of angels and beasts during that time, but you're doing it in love, because you love each other, you love yourself, and you love your fellow man. That is my prayer today. Amen.